Mother's Day. I didn't expect to be working today on Mother's Day, but I am actually very happy to be working today on Mother's Day. And I would like to dedicate this episode to Darlene Hamlet and Carly Aylesworth on Mother's Day, because we've got big news for you and big news for them. Darlene will not be getting a call from her daughter, Lynette Hooker, to wish her a happy Mother's Day, because Lynette is missing and presumed dead in the Bahamas. And Carly will not be able to call her mom, Lynette Hooker, and wish her a happy Mother's Day for the same reason. But I will wish them a happy Mother's Day. And this gift comes courtesy of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Investigative Services, who grabbed Brian Hooker's 46-foot sloop in international waters, hooked that thing up, and towed it into America this morning. It is now evidence in a criminal investigation. And that is very bad news for one Brian Hooker, who says that his wife Lynette just bounced off the back of that dinghy on our way out to the boat, Soulmate, and then he proceeded to bounce right out of the Bahamas instead of staying to help look for her. But now Soulmate is in the custody of the United States authorities. And you know they are going to comb that thing for every piece of forensic evidence and digital evidence and electronic evidence and anything else on board.
The ocean has a way of swallowing secrets, but today, the Atlantic decided to spit one back out. For weeks, the world has been captivated by the haunting mystery of Lynette Hooker, a woman who vanished into the crystal-clear waters of the Bahamas under circumstances so murky they have ignited a firestorm of international suspicion. While the primary search area near Marsh Harbor remained silent, a different kind of storm was brewing just off the coast of Florida. This is the moment the narrative shifted from a missing persons case to a high-stakes federal criminal recovery. On a day dedicated to honoring mothers, a gift of justice was delivered from the churning gray waves of the Atlantic. The United States Coast Guard, in a bold and tactical maneuver, intercepted and seized the 46-foot sloop known as Soulmate. This was not a routine boarding. This was a targeted, intelligence-driven seizure of what many believe to be a floating crime scene. For the family of Lynette Hooker, her mother Darlene and her daughter Carly, this Mother's Day brought no phone calls from Lynette, but it brought something Brian Hooker likely never expected: the long arm of the American law reaching out into international waters to grab back the evidence he tried to sail away from. The timeline of this seizure reads like a psychological thriller. While Brian Hooker was reportedly underground in Michigan or Sacramento, distancing himself from the turquoise waters where his wife was last seen alive, his most valuable asset, and perhaps his most damning liability, was on the move. The Soulmate had been sitting on a mooring ball in the Bahamas, a silent witness to whatever transpired on that fateful night in May. Brian Hooker, a former Marine with the tactical knowledge to navigate both the sea and the system, had reportedly been shopping for delivery captains. He didn't want to sail the boat back himself. He wanted it delivered to American shores, perhaps thinking that once the vessel touched a Florida dock under the guidance of a hired crew, it would simply be returned to his possession, scrubbed of its history. But he underestimated the resolve of the Coast Guard Investigative Services. They were not watching from a distance. They were on him like glue. As the Soulmate began its transit, moving from its mooring ball and provisioning for a 24-hour crossing, the gears of federal power were already turning. The delivery crew, likely unaware of the explosive nature of their cargo, pushed the vessel hard, 6.4 knots, according to maritime tracking data. They were hauling ass, as the locals say, trying to beat a massive weather system moving in. But you cannot outrun a federal dragnet.
A 48-hour journey. We had some amazing spies and incredible helpers who allowed us to track this boat all the way from its mooring ball in Marsh Harbor to the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station in Florida, where it is currently tied up and will be absolutely reamed for every ounce of forensic evidence that it will offer. And I believe it's going to offer a lot. So here's what happened. On May 6th, Soulmate moved off of the mooring ball that it had been on for weeks and weeks since Brian just, picked up and bolted from the Bahamas, while everybody else was looking for Lynette, because he said she was lost at sea. Don't know how it happened. Former Marine. May 6th, suddenly, the Conch Inn mooring ball where Brian Hooker was paying for the rental of being able to hook onto that mooring ball and let Soulmate float in the middle of Marsh Harbor. It moved from that mooring ball to another mooring ball, closer to the Conch Inn and closer to the docks. And I was wondering at the time, now, what's going on? I didn't know if maybe it was a less desirable mooring ball, and since no one's on the boat and other customers might want the more desirable, maybe that's why. I wondered if maybe it was getting ready for a sale. Maybe they wanted it closer to shore. Maybe they wanted to just keep eyes on it because it was such a specimen. It's become such a story. Soulmate, I believe, a crime scene. I believe a crime scene. Just speculating here. But as it turned out, I may have been right on some points, but definitely the real purpose was to bring Soulmate into the dock, because on May 8th, Wendy, thank you, Wendy, for being so amazing to us and helping us to get this piece of the story.
As the Soulmate crossed into the open ocean, past the hauntingly named Memory Rock, the final landmark before the deep Atlantic, the electronic eyes of the world were watching. The vessel's AIS, the automatic identification system, began to flicker. On, off. A digital game of hide and seek that raised every red flag in the book. Why would a vessel in transit turn off its primary safety beacon in the middle of a crossing? Was it an attempt to mask the location? Was it a directive from the owner? Regardless of the intent, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Robert Yared and the Winslow Greaser were already positioned. They weren't just patrolling, they were hunting for the truth. Roughly 40 miles off the coast of Fort Pierce, Florida, in the middle of a torrential storm that turned the ocean into a wrecking ball of gray water and white foam, the interception happened. Imagine the scene: the howling wind, the sideways rain, and suddenly, the flashing lights of a Coast Guard response boat cutting through the dark. The loudspeaker command echoing over the waves. The boarding team, wet and determined, climbing onto the deck of the Soulmate. In that moment, the vessel was no longer a private home. It became property of the United States government. This seizure is a catastrophic blow to the narrative Brian Hooker has spent weeks trying to maintain. His story, the one where Lynette simply bounced off the back of a dinghy and vanished, has been under forensic fire from day one. He claimed the wind and waves took her, yet meteorological data proved the sea was like glass that night. He claimed he couldn't find her, yet he was the one who bolted from the Bahamas while volunteers were still diving for her body. By hiring delivery captains to bring the boat to Florida, Brian was effectively trying to wash his hands of the crime scene. He thought he was bring his asset home. Instead, he was delivering the evidence directly into the hands of the best forensic investigators in the world.
And we could see that too because they had their AIS on, which is this marine tracking system where you can see boats all over the place and their movements and their owners and all the rest. And then boom, all of a sudden AIS went off. Right out of Marsh Harbor, boop, out it went, which was weird. But this is Brian Hooker after all, right? Master of masking his location and maybe masking the location of his things. The only thing is, and we didn't say this because we didn't want Brian to know this, we were still following him because there's another app out there called No Foreign Land, and it's run by some very, very kind sailors who live aboard and like to have a sailing community. It's sort of a crowdsourced community where you can all sort of check in with each other. And the No Foreign Land was still on. And it was on for quite some time, so we were able to follow Soulmate on its journey. Until about halfway across, that went out too, which I thought was weird. But okay. That didn't mean we weren't following. Because, I mean, dog with a bone, you know me. I have not let this go, and I am not letting it go. In any case, here's where things got hinky. The boat looked like it was kind of headed towards Fort Lauderdale and then started to vector overnight sort of northward. And I wondered, okay, it would be weird to get into the Gulf Stream and have a little bit of a help along the way, you know, a little bit of a push. Lots of people do that. And then it was a late night. This was, by the way, this was Friday night. So this was May the 8th. I'm doing this on May the 10th. Yeah, it's been a long 2 days.
The Coast Guard Investigative Services, or CAIS, are not beat cops. They are elite federal agents who specialize in maritime law and complex criminal forensics. When they hooked up the Soulmate and began the arduous process of towing it through a storm into Fort Pierce, they were securing the keys to the kingdom. The significance of this boat being on American soil cannot be overstated. into the Bahamas investigation was hampered by jurisdictional hurdles and limited resources. But in Florida, at the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station, the Soulmate is now subject to a forensic reaming. Every square inch of that sloop will be scrutinized. We are talking about luminol tests to find traces of scrubbed blood. We are talking about the extraction of data from the onboard Starlink system, which can tell investigators exactly when phones connected to the Wi-Fi and where the boat was positioned down to the meter. They will be looking for Lynette's belongings, the things she would never have left behind if she had truly fallen overboard in a swimsuit. Her navy blue headscarf. Her aquamarine bathing suit cover-up. If those items are found in the masthead or the cabin, Brian Hooker's story doesn't just leak, it sinks. He told rescuers she was wearing a black two-piece. If her other clothes are on that boat, it proves she made it back to the Soulmate that night. It proves she didn't vanish from a dinghy. It proves that whatever happened to Lynette Hooker happened behind the closed doors of that 46-foot sloop. As the sun rose over Fort Pierce and the Soulmate was escorted into the harbor, side by side with a 45-foot medium response boat, the message was clear: the escape is over. The boat is in handcuffs. For Brian Hooker, who has remained underground, citing his sick mother or his need for privacy, this is a wake-up call that the Atlantic Ocean is not a graveyard for the truth. The Coast Guard didn't just seize a boat, they seized the narrative. They have taken the primary piece of physical evidence in a suspected homicide and brought it into a jurisdiction where science and law meet with terrifying precision. This isn't just a twist in the case, it is a total pivot. The hunt for Lynette is now a hunt for the truth hidden within the fibers and filters of the Soulmate. The silence of the Bahamas has been replaced by the focused, high-tech scrutiny of American federal agents. And as we move into the next phase of this investigation, one thing is certain: boats don't lie, but the people who sail them often do. The Soulmate is ready to talk, and the world is finally ready to listen. The seizure of the Soulmate is not merely a logistical victory, it is a forensic goldmine that threatens to dismantle every syllable of Brian Hooker's alibi. When the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Services, SEIZES, officially took custody of that 46-foot sloop, they weren't just taking a boat, they were taking a time capsule of the final moments of Lynette Hooker's known life. To understand why this is a 10-10 level twist, you have to look at the anatomy of a maritime crime scene. A boat is a closed ecosystem. Unlike a house on land, where a suspect can flee through multiple exits or dispose of evidence in 1,000 different directions, a boat in the middle of the ocean is a pressurized container of truth. Whatever happened between Brian and Lynette on that vessel stayed on that vessel, and now that the boat is tied to a secure dock in Fort Pierce, the silence is about to end. The investigators who are currently reaming this boat for every ounce of evidence are not looking for the obvious. They are looking for the microscopic, the digital, and the discarded. They are looking for the things Brian Hooker, despite his marine training and his tactical precision, likely forgot to scrub. The first and most devastating blow to Brian's narrative lies in the simple physics of clothing. According to his official statement to the Bahamian search and rescue teams, Lynette bounced off the back of their dinghy while they were transiting from the Abaco in back to the Soulmate. He told them she was wearing a two-piece black bathing suit. That was the description that went out to every volunteer diver and every helicopter pilot scouring the Sea of Abaco. But there is a massive problem with that story. Eyewitnesses and photographic evidence from earlier that day show Lynette wearing a navy blue Conch Republic headscarf and a distinct aquamarine bathing suit cover-up. She was also seen with a black fanny pack and a powder pink Apple Watch. If the Kai's forensics team opens the door to the master cabin or searches the head and finds that blue headscarf, that aquamarine cover-up, or that fanny pack, the fell-off-the-dinghy story is dead in the water. If those clothes are on the boat, it means Lynette Hooker made it back to the Soulmate. It means she climbed aboard, perhaps went below deck to shower and change after a long day at Tahiti Beach, and was in a place of perceived safety. If her clothes are on the boat, she didn't vanish in the ocean. She vanished in the presence of her husband. But the evidence goes deeper than fabric. We are living in the age of the digital witness, and the Soulmate was a high-tech vessel. It was equipped with a Starlink satellite system, which acts as a digital heartbeat for the boat. Every time a device connects to that Wi-Fi, every time a ping is sent to a satellite, a timestamp is created. Forensic digital analysts are currently pulling the logs from that Starlink router. They will be able to see exactly what time Lynette's phone or Apple Watch synced with the boat's network. If those devices synced at 7:45 p.m., the approximate time they would have arrived back at the boat from the Abaco Inn, then Brian's story about her falling off the dinghy during the transit is a verifiable lie. They will also be looking at the boat's GPS and chart plotter. Even though Brian reportedly turned off the AIS, the tracking system that lets other boats see you, most modern vessels have internal logging that records every movement, every engine start, and every change in coordinates. Did the boat move in the middle of the night? Was it repositioned? The Soulmate knows, and now the Kais knows. Then there is the physical evidence of a struggle. Brian Hooker has a history that cannot be ignored, a history that Ashley Banfield and other investigators have highlighted with chilling detail. There are allegations of domestic violence, stories of him putting his hands around Lynette's neck, and even a past legal case involving his own daughter. While he was acquitted in that case, the pattern described by friends and family is one of choking until passing out. If a struggle occurred below deck, it is nearly impossible to clean up every trace. The Kais team will be using luminol and high-intensity forensic lighting to look for blood spatter or even wipe down patterns areas that are too clean, suggesting someone used bleach to hide a crime. They will be looking at the railings, the swim platform, and the dinghy itself. They will be looking for signs of a man overboard maneuver. If Brian truly lost his wife in the water, a former Marine would have executed a very specific set of actions to recover her. If the boat's logs don't show those maneuvers, it suggests there was no rescue attempt because there was no accident. The VIP element of this investigation is the sheer expertise of the Coast Guard Investigative Services. These agents deal with some of the most complex international crimes on the planet: human trafficking, drug smuggling, and high-seas homicides. They are not intimidated by Brian's Marine background or his attempts to mask his location. In fact, his attempts to hide likely made them more suspicious. Turning off the AIS during a crossing in a storm is not the behavior of a man who has nothing to hide, it's the behavior of a man who is trying to slip under the radar. But the Kais had aircraft following the Soulmate. They had cutters like the Robert Yared and the Winslow Greaser tracking him like prey. They allowed the delivery captains to bring the boat into U.S. waters because they knew that once the boat hit the 12-mile limit, their jurisdictional power became absolute. They waited for the perfect moment to strike, and they did it in the middle of a storm that would have deterred any lesser agency. For Brian Hooker, the seizure of this boat is a psychological and legal nightmare. He thought he was being smart by hiring delivery captains. He thought he could stay in Michigan or Sacramento and wait for his asset to be delivered to a quiet marina where he could sell it or hide it. He didn't realize he was sending his own black box recorder straight to the federal government. The Soulmate was his home for 4 years. It contains his DNA, his habits, and his secrets. Now that home is a sterile lab where every fingerprint and every digital bite is being used to build a case. As we move closer to the forensic results, the pressure on Brian is mounting. He is no longer just a grieving husband in the Bahamas. He is a person of interest in a federal criminal investigation with his primary asset in lockup. The Soulmate is no longer his sanctuary, it is his accuser. And in the world of high-stakes forensics, the boat always tells the truth, even when the captain refuses to. The investigation is now focused on one question: what does the Soulmate know about the night Lynette Hooker disappeared? The answer is buried in the hardware, and the Kais is about to dig it out. To understand why the seizure of the Soulmate is the ultimate checkmate move, one must analyze the man at the center of the storm, Brian Hooker. This isn't just a story about a missing woman. It is a story about a tactical mind facing off against federal precision. Brian Hooker is not an average civilian. He is a former Marine, trained in survival, navigation, and the art of maintaining composure under extreme pressure. In the world of military tactics, there is a concept known as controlling the environment. From the moment Lynette vanished, Brian appeared to be doing exactly that. He controlled the narrative by being the sole witness to her fall. He controlled the physical evidence by keeping the boat in the Bahamas, a jurisdiction where forensic resources are spread thin across hundreds of islands. And finally, he tried to control the transition by hiring delivery captains to move the boat while he remained hundreds of miles away. But the fatal flaw in the tactical mind is often overconfidence. The belief that you are the smartest person in the room, or in this case, the smartest person on the ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Services, Kais, and Ashley Banfield have highlighted a series of hinky behaviors that suggest a calculated attempt to evade scrutiny. Let's look at the escape from the Bahamas. While the community of Hope Town and Marsh Harbor was pouring its heart and soul into finding Lynette, while volunteers were using their own fuel, their own boats, and their own tears to search the Sea of Abaco, Brian Hooker did something that shocked the locals. He left. He didn't just leave the search area, he left the country. A former Marine, a man trained to never leave a man behind, abandoned the very waters where he claimed his soulmate had drowned. He cited the need to see his sick mother, a classic emotional shield, but to investigators, this looked like a tactical extraction. He was removing himself from the immediate heat of the local police. However, he left his most significant piece of property behind, the 46-foot sloop.
I want to know if Lynette's navy blue Conch Republic headscarf is on that boat. I want to know if Lynette's aquamarine bathing suit cover-up is on that boat. I want to know if what looked like a black fanny pack that we saw on Lynette in her last photo that we know of is on Soulmate. I want to know. Because if it is, there is no reason for it to be there if Brian Hooker was telling the truth. The way he said it, they left the conch in and out she went. I couldn't, couldn't get her. She just bounced off the back and the waves and the wind, which didn't exist because we've already proven that. And you're a Marine. Give me a break, former Marine. So how on earth would the things that she was wearing, aquamarine bathing suit cover-up, royal blue Conch Republic headscarf, and the Apple Watch with the powder pink band, how would all those things get on board? We know that the powder pink Apple Watch is in the custody of the police. We know that. We also know that it, used to die. Like the battery was really bad on that Apple Watch, and Lynette's habit was to take it off sometime around dinner time, 6, 7, 8, and put it on the charger. So let's game this out, shall we? Lynette doesn't fall off the back of the dinghy. Duh. But instead, the dinghy makes it back to Soulmate, say around 7:40-ish, 7:45, somewhere in there. It's about a 12-minute ride or so from the Abaco Inn out to where Soulmate was anchored in Aunt Pat's Bay. So the dinghy makes it there, and they both board Soulmate, and their electronics hook up to the Starlink that they have there on the mast. And any other electronics, say their phones. And let's say...
For weeks, the Soulmate sat on a mooring ball, a floating ghost ship. During this time, Brian was reportedly shopping for delivery captains. This is a critical detail. In the maritime world, hiring a delivery crew is common for wealthy owners, but in the context of a missing person case, it is highly irregular. Why wouldn't Brian want to be on the boat himself? Why wouldn't he want to be there to ensure that every piece of Lynette's property was handled with care? The answer, according to investigative theory, is that Brian knew the boat was hot. He knew that if he sailed the boat into a U.S. port, he would be met by federal agents the moment he stepped onto the dock. By hiring a delivery crew, he was using them as a buffer. He was testing the waters to see if the boat could slip through without him. He was willing to pay many thousands of dollars to have someone else take the risk of crossing the Atlantic. But he found that his lore, the dark cloud of suspicion following his name, was more powerful than his money. Captain after captain turned him down. They didn't want their names associated with the Soulmate. They didn't want to be the ones caught steering a crime scene into the arms of the law. When he finally found a crew willing to take the job, the behavior of the vessel during the crossing became even more suspicious. The AIS, the digital lighthouse that announces a boat's presence to the world, went dark. In the professional maritime community, turning off your AIS during an ocean crossing, especially while approaching a major coastline like Florida, is a massive red flag. It is the digital equivalent of driving a car at night with the headlights off while wearing a mask. Brian, as a mariner, knows this. The delivery captain, if he was following Brian's orders, would know this too. The intent seems clear, to minimize the digital footprint of the Soulmate as it approached American soil. But you cannot hide a 46-foot sloop from the U.S. Coast Guard. They have radar that pierces through the dark, they have satellite imagery that tracks heat signatures, and they have spies in every harbor. While Brian thought his boat was slipping through the cracks, the Coast Guard cutter Robert Yared was already shadowing the vessel's path. The timing of the seizure on Mother's Day is a poetic irony that shouldn't be lost on anyone. While Brian was likely waiting for a phone call confirming the boat had arrived safely at a private slip in northern Florida, the Coast Guard was busy executing a boarding in the middle of a brutal storm. This speaks to the urgency of the federal government. They didn't wait for the boat to dock. They didn't wait for a convenient time. They intercepted it in international waters because they knew that every hour that boat remained in private hands was an hour that evidence could be tampered with. The storm provided the perfect cover for a tactical boarding. In the chaos of the wind and rain, the Coast Guard moved in, took control, and hooked it up. They bypassed Brian's delivery plan entirely and diverted the vessel to Fort Pierce, a location Brian had not chosen. Has been described by those close to the family as a man who used choking as a primary method of control. Choking, or manual strangulation, is one of the most significant red flags in domestic violence. It is often the final step before a homicide. Friends of Lynette have shared stories and photographs of bruises, evidence of a life lived in fear. If Brian did indeed put his hands on Lynette one last time on the Soulmate, he would have had to dispose of her body in a way that left no trace. But he couldn't dispose of the memory of the boat. He couldn't dispose of the electronic logs that show what time the dinghy engine stopped. He couldn't dispose of the Starlink data that shows when Lynette's Apple Watch stopped sending heart rate data to the cloud. The Marines' calculus failed because it didn't account for the persistence of the drop-dead serious community and the federal authorities. Brian thought he could wait out the clock. He thought that if enough time passed, the missing at sea narrative would become the accepted truth. But the seizure of the Soulmate has reset the clock to zero. The boat is now in a sterile environment. The delivery captains, who were likely shocked to find themselves boarded by federal agents, are now witnesses. They will be questioned. What did they see on the boat? Did they notice any scrubbed areas? Were they given specific instructions to keep the AIS off? Were they told to avoid certain ports? Every instruction Brian gave them is now a piece of the puzzle. The master of masking his location has finally been outmaneuvered. The boat he tried to use as a getaway vehicle is now a federal prison for his secrets. As the investigators in Fort Pierce begin their work, the question isn't if they will find something, it's what they will find first. The tactical retreat of Brian Hooker has led him directly into a strategic ambush, and the Soulmate is about to give up the ghost. The arrival of the Soulmate at the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station represents more than just a successful maritime operation. It represents the closing of the circle around Brian Hooker. In the high-stakes world of criminal investigation, there is a moment known as the breaking point. The instant where the weight of physical evidence becomes too heavy for a fabricated narrative to support. As the 46-foot sloop sits docked under the watchful eyes of federal agents, we are entering that phase. Brian Hooker's alibi, which he has carefully curated from the moment he called for help in the Bahamas, is no longer facing the skepticism of the public. It is facing the cold, hard reality of forensic science. This final part of the script explores the endgame of this investigation and the devastating impact this seizure will have on the quest for justice for Lynette Hooker. The most critical aspect of the Soulmate's return to American soil is the shift in legal jurisdiction. The Bahamas case was treated as a missing person investigation, a category that often lacks the aggressive forensic backing of a homicide case. But the moment the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Services, SEIZES, hooked that tow line, the game changed. The SEIZES is now operating under the assumption that a crime has been committed against a U.S. citizen in international waters or on a U.S.-registered vessel. This gives them the power to utilize the full spectrum of federal resources. We are talking about the FBI's laboratory in Quantico, the most advanced digital forensic units in the world, and experts who specialize in waterborne crime scenes. Brian Hooker thought he was leaving his problems behind in the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, but he accidentally invited the full weight of the American justice system to board his home. As investigators move through the cabins of the Soulmate, they are looking for the silent witnesses that Brian couldn't erase. In forensic pathology, there is a concept called Locard's exchange principle. Every contact leaves a trace. If Lynette Hooker died on that boat, she left something behind. It might be a single strand of hair caught in a hinge, a microscopic drop of blood beneath a floorboard, or skin cells embedded in the fabric of a mattress. Brian may have scrubbed the surfaces with bleach, but modern forensics can see through chemical cleaning. They will use specialized light sources that reveal biological fluids even after they've been washed away. They will take apart the plumbing in the heads and the bilge pumps, looking for any physical evidence that was flushed or drained. They are not just looking for Lynette, they are looking for the absence of Lynette in places where she should have been. One of the most damning pieces of evidence likely sitting on that boat right now is the digital ghost. Every modern yacht is a network of interconnected sensors. The Soulmate was equipped with high-end navigation and communication systems. Investigators will be looking for the power logs. Did the boat's electricity usage spike at 3 a.m.? Did the winch operate in the middle of the night? On a sailboat, deploying an anchor or lowering a swim platform requires power. If the logs show that the swim platform was lowered miles away from where Brian said Lynette fell, his story doesn't just leak, it implodes. Furthermore, they will be analyzing the Starlink data with surgical precision. If Brian was searching for how to clean blood from fiberglass or tide patterns in the Abaco Sea on the night she vanished, the search history, even if deleted, can often be recovered from a hardware. The human element of this 10/10 twist is the delivery crew. These two individuals, the captain and the first mate, are now the most important witnesses in the federal government's arsenal. They spent over 24 hours on that boat. They lived in the spaces where Lynette lived. They breathed the same air. They likely noticed things that Brian, in his state of tactical panic, overlooked. Did they find a hidden compartment? Did they smell the heavy scent of cleaning chemicals when they first boarded? Did they find a piece of jewelry tucked into a corner? Most importantly, they will be questioned about the AIS. If they were instructed by Brian Hooker to keep the tracking system off during the crossing, that instruction becomes consciousness of guilt evidence. In a court of law, a prosecutor will ask, why would an innocent man want his boat to be invisible while crossing the Atlantic? There is no innocent answer to that question. The emotional weight of this moment is centered on Mother's Day. Ashley Banfield's dedication of this breakthrough to Darlene and Carly is a reminder that behind the VIP shocking titles and the twisted mysteries is a family that has been shattered. For Carly, who lived on that boat in February, the soulmate isn't just evidence, it's a place of memories. She knows the layout of that boat. She knows where her mother kept her things. Her cooperation with investigators, providing details about her mother's habits, like taking off her Apple Watch to charge it during dinner, is the foundation upon which this forensic search is built. The family's suffering has been exacerbated by Brian's silence and his subsequent bolting from the scene. But the seizure of the boat provides a form of closure that the ocean never could. It proves that the world has not forgotten Lynette Hooker. As the sun sets over the Fort Pierce station, the soulmate sits silent, but it is screaming with information. Brian Hooker is now a man without a sanctuary. His asset is gone, his home is a laboratory, and his soulmate is still missing, yet her presence is felt in every corner of the vessel the Coast Guard just brought home. The narrative of the accidental fall is being replaced by a meticulously documented criminal file. This was the breaking news the world was waiting for, the moment where the hunter became the hunted. The U.S. Coast Guard didn't just seize a yacht, they seized the truth from the jaws of the Atlantic. In the coming days and weeks, as the lab results return and the digital logs are decrypted, the pressure will reach an atmospheric high. The Og Lagana Iwala, fire starting, news isn't just about the seizure, it's about what comes next. An indictment? An arrest? A confession? Whatever the outcome, the soulmate has finished its final voyage as a private vessel. It is now a monument to the persistence of investigative journalism and federal law enforcement. The message to anyone who thinks the ocean can hide a crime is loud and clear. You can sail for the horizon, you can turn off your lights, and you can hire a crew to run your errands, but the truth is an anchor, and it will always bring you back to shore. Happy Mother's Day, Lynette. The world is finally bringing you home, one piece of evidence at a time. The case is no longer just serious, it is drop-dead certain that the truth will out.